Bonjour everybody, in today's video I'll be showing you how to make a basic skirt pattern. To get started, you will need some measurements. You will need your waist circumference divided by 4 plus ease, your upper hip circumference divided by 4 plus ease, full hip divided by 4 plus ease, and your vertical measurements, which are waist to upper hip, your waist to full hip or hip depth, and your waist to knee measurement or your desired length. And next, you'll need your materials, which will be your hip curve ruler, your straight edge ruler, pattern paper, marking tool, and your measuring tape. I'm first getting started by drawing the front skirt, and I'm using my right angle ruler to draw two perpendicular lines, and the top will be my waist line and the other will be my center front line. I am extending my waistline, and on my center front line I am going to mark my waist to full hip measurement, which for me that is 9.5 inches, and I am marking my waist to upper hip measurement on that same center front line. That's 5 inches for me, and then I use my ruler to extend a line from my full hip point, and I am going to mark a quarter of my full hip measurement plus ease on that line. That's 9 3/4 of an inch for me, and I draw a line from that point all the way to the waistline. Next, I am extending a line from the upper hip measurement, and I am going to mark my quarter upper hip measurement plus ease on that line. That is 8.5 inches for me. And on my waistline, I am marking my quarter waist plus ease plus 3/4 of an inch for dot. And next, I'm taking my hip curve ruler to connect my waist to my full hip measurement. And as you can see, when I'm using the curviest part of my hip curve ruler, I get much more excess at the upper hip mark. And here I'm using the shallowest part of my curve ruler, and the excess on my upper hip is much less than what I had. So this is the excess I have, and I will be transferring that into my dot. To start my dot, I bring my bodice to my skirt because I want the center front to dot leg to be the same distance on my skirt as it is on my bodice. So I mark that on my skirt, and now I am marking my dot width, which is 3/4 of an inch, and I'm marking the midpoint of that. And then I'm using my ruler to draw a straight line from the midpoint of my dot all the way down, and then I am going to mark the length of my dot on this line. That will be 6 inches for me because my dot on my back is 7, and your front dot is usually 1 inch less than the back dot. So I am going to transfer the excess onto that dot. And as you can see, when I'm using a straight ruler, there's not enough on my upper hip. There won't be enough for me to remove that excess from there. So I am using a curve ruler to create a curvy dot instead that will allow me to remove the excess that is on my upper hip, remove it from my dot. So I'm using the curvy part, the middle of my ruler. The shallower the curve is, the less you will take, and I need to take a bit, so I moved it to the middle of my ruler. And this is what my dot is looking like, and I measure what I have on the dot and what I have on the hip. And next, I am going to extend my hip line to shape my waist. So I'm marking a quarter of an inch on top of my waistline, and I'm using my hip curve ruler to connect that quarter inch to my dot point, my dot leg that is closest to it. Next, I am extending my center front line so I can create the length of my skirt, and I'm taking my tape measure and measure from my waist down to my desired length. That will be my knee length. That's 25 inches for me. And then I'm using my ruler to draw a line squaring across from that point. That will be my hemline. And then I am going to draw a line from my hip to my hemline, and my skirt is almost done. And as you can see, my hip is pointy, and that's not how my body is shaped. So I'm using my ruler to smooth out that point there so I can have a smooth curve. And my skirt is pretty much done. If I were to do a pencil skirt, I would have gone in from the side seam to 1.5 inches and draw a line up to the hip. And that is my front skirt. Now onto the back of my skirt. I'm starting my back the same way I did the front, using my right angle ruler to draw two perpendicular lines, and the top will be my waistline and the other will be my center back line. I am going to extend my waistline, and then I'm using my measuring tape to measure my waist to full hip measurement on the center back line. That's 9.5 inches for me, and my waist to upper hip, that's 5 inches for me. And I'm using my ruler to extend lines from these points, my full hip and my upper hip. Now I'm drawing a quarter of my full hip on my full hip line. That's quarter plus ease. Same for the upper hip, a quarter of my upper hip plus ease. And now I draw a line from the full hip point to my waist. And now I'm marking a quarter of my waist plus ease plus 1 inch on my waistline. And next, I'm using my hip curve ruler to connect my waist to my full hip. And when I use the curvier part of my hip curve ruler, the excess at my upper hip is a lot more than I need. And when I use the shallower part of the curve ruler, you can see the excess is a lot less, and I can remove that from my dot. To create my dot, I start the same way I did the front using my back bodice. Starting from the center back, I mark the same distance that it is on the bodice. And from that point, I mark 1 inch. That's the amount of my dot space. And I mark the midpoint of my dot. And then I'm drawing a line from the midpoint all the way down. And I am marking my dot length. That is 7 inches for me. And if you have not seen my measurement video, definitely check it out where I explain this. And so here I am using my curve ruler to create my curvy dot. I do create curvy dots, especially for my back, because I think I have a sway back and that does help me. But the main reason also is because of my hip being narrow, that allows me to remove the excess from my upper hip from the dot. And here I did have more in my dot than I needed. So I am using a shallower part of the ruler just to remove that 1/16th bit that was in excess at the dot, just to make it a bit more narrow so it can match the excess that I have on the upper hip. So I'm not taking much more than I need to. I measured it. Once I corrected it, made sure it was the correct amount. Here I am going to extend my hip line. Just like I did for the front, I am going to mark a 1/4 inch to help me shape my waist. And for the center back, I am going to mark 1/2 inch from the waist point down. The standard, I believe, is a 1/4 inch, but I do think I have somewhat of a sway back, so the 1/2 inch works for me. And I am connecting my hip to the center back using my curve ruler. And my top of the skirt is pretty much done. And so here I am going to work on the bottom and extend my center back line. I am going to mark my length from the original waist point to the length. That's 25 inches for me. And I am marking a point, and I'm going to use my ruler to square across from that point, marking my hemline. And then from my hip point, I am going to draw a line down onto the hemline, and for my hip, I am going to smooth that out again because my hip is much more narrow. It does not have any pointy part. So that helps me a lot. And my skirt is pretty much done. That's what it's looking like after I cut it out. And next, I'm going to create my waistband. My waistband will be 1.5 inches in width. So what I do is mark 1.5 inches from the waist line all throughout, all across my skirt. I do the same thing for the back as well. I mark 1.5 inches from the waistline down. And then I'm using my ruler for the front. The front part is squared across, so I'm using my straight ruler. And then I'm using my curve ruler for the rest of my hip. And I could have gone down for the center front of my skirt, but I did not. I like to leave it that way. And so for the back, I'm doing the same thing. I am marking 1.5 inch down from the waistline all across the skirt pattern. And then I am going to use my curve ruler and connecting these points together. And you can cut the waistband from the skirt, but I do prefer to leave mine's on because I do like a seamless waist. So what I'm doing here is almost like creating a facing. But if you do remove your waistband from the skirt, if you detach it, then this will be how you connect it all together. But mine is just going to be a facing for me because I'm leaving the waistband on because I like the seamless waist. And when I do a different style, if I am adding the waist, it's not a seamless waist. I will use my tracing wheel, and that's how I would make adjustments on my pattern because I don't remove the waist from it. And so I just trace the front waist and the back waist, marking my dot points because I will be cutting it open so I can close the dots. I use my tracing wheels on all the important points that I will need to mark and differentiate, and that helps me to mark those points and then mark them on the copy. And I'm using my curve ruler to finish tracing my waistband pieces, and then I'm cutting it out, and I cut the dot and close it using a tape, and that's what it looks like. I do the same thing for the back. I'm using a piece of tape, and I close my waist, and now I am attaching it together so I can make one piece waistband. So I trace around my waistband for the front, and the front will be cut on fold. And so I trace around and I flip my bag so that the side seams meet, and then I trace around the back. And that's how I connect my waistband to make one piece. I smooth out the points where they connect, and that's pretty much my waistband. It is done. And I just cut it out, and my skirt is completely done. Well, my skirt pattern, it is completely done. I have my waistband, my front and my back, and I went ahead and cut out all my pieces onto my fabric of choice. I'm using a flannel type of fabric, very cozy fabric, and this is what my skirt is looking like. I did have shorts underneath that made the side seams look a bit bunched up, but that's just from my shorts underneath. Overall, I'm very satisfied with the skirt pattern. I think it fits as best as it can, considering my body the way it is. When I wear ready to wear basic skirts, they usually look interesting on me because I do have a long rise and narrow hips, but making my own pattern works really well for me. That's what my dots look like on the sides, and I do have some zipper area at the back where it makes it look like something is poking, but it's just a zipper area. And I am satisfied with the pattern overall. It's better than ready to wear garments, that's for sure. I tend to stay away from ready to wear fitted skirts because they usually look funny on me since I have narrow hips and long rise. The average rise, I believe it's maximum 8 inches, and mine is about 10 inches, but I use 9.5 inches for the skirt. When I'm making pants, I use 10. And this is what things look like laying flat. So you can see the curve from the waist to hip, very shallow. And overall, I am satisfied. And that's all for my skirt pattern video. Thank you so much for watching. And until next time, bye.